The assembly on the wood chipper is complete. The tires will need some air. We will need to put some oil and fuel in the motor. A couple of interesting warranty things you need to be cautious about. According to the instructions, the motor has, or the engine has, a sensor that will not start or run the motor when the oil becomes low. That's pretty good, and the two warranty issues, one is pretty obvious, the second one isn't, is that if you let the engine oil go down low, it will void the warranty of the wood chipper. So always make sure your oil level is full and check it every time before you start the motor. The other warranty issue that is rather surprising is you have to use a fuel stabilizer in the fuel. If you do not, it will void the warranty. So be aware of that. I mixed up 5 gallons of fuel and put the appropriate amount of fuel stabilizer in there. Luckily, in the area that I am in presently, I can get ethanol-free fuel. So in most of my powered gadgets, I run ethanol-free fuel. If you do not have that luxury and you have to use ethanol fuel, make sure you put an ethanol-free additive in your fuel. It makes the engines last a little better. Ethanol has a tendency of dissolving rubber seals, etc. if you get too much ethanol in there. So I would, if you can, run the ethanol-free fuel. If not, get yourself an ethanol additive. So another thing I would do, since this is first time assembled, I'm going to go through and tighten up all the nuts and bolts that are visible. Make sure everything is tight. Now, let me show you one other thing. The instructions indicate that after every time you use the chipper, that you want to remove the covers and you want to clean out any refuge that is left in the chipper. So that's something you can do. There's a little inspection cover here. You can remove this and you can go through and clean out any leftover residue that was chipped and doesn't come out of the chute. Another thing is they do recommend, let me go get it, I'll be back in a second. They do provide a collection bag, and they always recommend that you install the bag when operating the chipper. Being that I'm out on a wide open space, I'm going to try running it without the bag and make sure nobody's standing around it. But if you're in a little bit more tighter quarters, I would recommend using the bag. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and make sure, again, all the visible nuts and bolts were tightened properly at the factory. Sometimes that is not the case. Okay, I'm using a 10 millimeter box end wrench to do that. The other side of the cover that can come off is a 13 millimeter, so I will check all of those. Again, we're going to put some air in the tires. We're going to put some oil in the engine, some fuel in the engine, and then here in a little bit we're going to fire up the chipper for the first time. There are break-in instructions in the manual that you should follow closely to properly break in the engine, and they recommend after the break-in period that you do change the oil. So make sure you do that, because the first hours of operation of a new engine are critical to make sure that the valve rings are seating properly. So make sure you follow the break-in operation. So let's go ahead and service the oil and some fuel, finish checking all of the nuts and bolts, and then we'll do a first firing. Recommended tire pressure on the chipper is 25 psi. So we're going to check and more than likely fill the tires. Sure enough, there we go. Both tires 25 psi. Let's service the oil now. There's two engine oil caps on this engine, one on the left side and one on the right side. The one on the right side has a dipstick on it. Recommendations are to fill the engine oil up to where there's about 1/4 of an inch down from the dipstick, or there's an image in the manual that shows the appropriate level for full engine oil. One thing is check the manual for your type of oil. Depending on where you live and the temperature range, you want to make sure that your oil is appropriate for the temperature. Where I am, it recommends 1030. Probably your area will be 1030 as well. So I'm going to put some 1030 motor oil in the engine. We'll pull off the dipstick here. And they recommend wiping it. Apparently at the factory they did a test. They then drained all the oil out. So again, they recommend about 1/4 of an inch below the top portion of the stick, and we're going to use a funnel, and then we're going to top off the oil. I'm going to start out with 1/4 of a quart and then do a check and see how I'm doing. Don't want to overfill your oil. You can also visually look down into the oil hole and see the oil level. So we know we're not quite there yet. So we'll put in now 1/2 quart and we'll do another check. Okay, I can see some oil up near the top. So now I'm going to do a stick. And we're about halfway on the stick, and I can see the oil level on the screw threads. So we have a little bit more to put in. What I'm going to do then is when we start the motor, we'll let it run a little bit to take in some of the oil, and then after we shut it down, we'll check the oil level again. Jiggle the tire a little here to see the oil level. I'm not screwing in the cap. The diagram that they have in the manual is showing that you just push the dipstick in to the base of the threads and not screw it in. So I'm going to check, and we look pretty good at this point. And from my guesstimations, we've used just over 1/2 quart in the engine. So now we're going to put some fuel in And in the next video, we're going to fire up the motor for the first time.